So welcome to the next in our online messages brought to you by the friends at First Church Rowley. This is Reverend Tom Bentley, the pastor, hoping these messages help you in your journey in life. If you'd like to know more about First Church Rowley, there'll be a little information for you at the end of this video. So thank you for spending time with us. So grace and peace to you from our friend Jesus. Paul traveled all around the ancient world and met with these little communities that were following Jesus, and they had collected writings of various kinds. Paul wrote a lot of letters because he couldn't be in more than one place at a time, and these little communities were wrestling with different ways of understanding this life of Jesus and what it meant. There was a group who were at the ancient city of Colossae, and there was a problem at Colossae. We don't know what it was, but people weren't acting appropriately, maybe salaciously, maybe in a perverted way, maybe they were following a false teaching that was encouraging them to live in a licentious way. Whatever it was, Paul wrote letters to this group at Colossae, and we have one of them, and we tried to figure out what as scholars describe it, what was the problem at Colossae. But Paul opens up saying he can't be there. He says, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be with you. I can't be with you. I pray for you. And then he bursts into this very interesting moment in the New Testament. It's really a hymn, a song, that seems to be what it is, that people at Colossae and perhaps in other places in the ancient world were singing this hymn. Let's take a look at it. Now we have here the opening of Colossians, the first chapter, but we're beginning at the 15th verse, moving to the 20th verse, because this contains this poem hymn. In Colossians, the gospel message starts as that we are rescued, transferred from death to life, and then by this poem, early in the letter, moves on to a description of God's beloved Son. Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things by making peace through the blood of his cross. All things, whether on earth or in heaven. This hymn is an announcement that all of creation has been brought together in the life, the ministry, the death, and the resurrection of this man, Jesus of Nazareth. And in that movement of things as Messiah, the Christ, everyone through faith can be brought into this wholeness and completion of God's intentionality for the universe. Nothing's missing, nothing's outside the domain of this messianic power, this truth, and for Paul very often love, which he celebrates in many beautiful ways in his writings. That's the message for us today. Well, you can move away from what's called religion, but you've brought yourself along with that move, and all the fundamental questions of human existence continue to be operating in each of our souls, in yours and mine. And we have to address this in some way. As the culture becomes more secular, I suggest it isn't necessarily less spiritual. It's just that a lot of language has changed because people are uncomfortable with much of it. As we see this poem that Paul offered, it's perhaps grating to you. Perhaps you find it anything but poetic, but it summarizes the completion of the presence of the divine, eternal Creator God. In my ministry, I have become hesitant to use the word God all the time, and I prefer to say the divine creative force of love in the universe. We're at this hub of awareness now as we seek to know the completeness of this universe and understand how it works. And when we look at this poem, we can see how the narrative of God, as we can understand God, is reflected. Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. There we have this opening line in the song, and all creation is thereby somehow in him and with him, and it says following, for in him all things were created in heaven and on earth. And I don't have the time to spend with each statement of this poem, but if you go back and see it in summary, it says that all things are brought together by the events of the divine intervention, the divine event of this person, Jesus. This evolutionary force of love and grace is intentional from the very beginning. The flow of being that we're in is well set up to allow us to participate with the divine creative force of love in the universe. And everything we do as human beings is another step in evolution. How can we know that the divine creative force of love in the universe is really with us and present in these events? That's the question of faith. We'll find empirical evidence of that, and then we'll find things that seem to contradict that God is present. But the flow continues on. So, as we wrestle with how to engage our own faith and our own life, my encouragement is that we can begin to see the intentionality of love and grace all about us in many things that we have created, but also in the miracle of nature. Return to this hymn. Be like those early Christians at Colossae, whom perhaps have wandered off the spiritual path. And can we see these words jump out at us and speak to us again? Because it says, and I believe this, for in him, this Jesus, this man, and this man who is now Messiah, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, by making peace through the blood of his cross. All things, whether on earth or in heaven. So all things are being brought together in the love and the grace of God. To understand that with your heart is the beginning of faith. That doesn't mean we know everything. It doesn't mean that we have all of this down tight and right in our orthodoxies. But it does mean that we, no matter how well read or otherwise, no matter how instructed or otherwise, can creatively engage the fullness of life in a loving way. That's the invitation from our New Testament writings. That's Paul the Apostle pointing us in the direction of the completion of God's intentionality for us. We can argue about that, but while we're arguing, can we not also lean on those everlasting arms and know that no matter what comes to pass, this creative force, this divine creative force of love in the universe will prevail, will bring us to some higher place in this evolutionary experience, and that what we see about us that seems so incomplete and broken will eventually be put together. That's the statement of faith, and in that place of encouragement, I can say thank you and amen. So thank you again for spending time with us. If you'd like to know more about the First Congregational Church of Raleigh or First Church Raleigh, you can go online at firstchurchraleigh.org. And of course, we'd always like to hear from you. You can call us anytime at 978-948-3993. So peace and best wishes. Goodbye.